The night her father sold her debt to Varro, she was counting change at the kitchen table, not metaphorically, literally counting quarters and dimes, trying to figure out if she had enough for the hydro bill and a bag of rice, when she heard the knock at the door and her father's voice go quiet in a way it never went quiet. Not when he was drunk, not when he was angry, not even when her mother left. That particular silence was new. She remembers thinking, someone just walked in who he's afraid of. She didn't go to the door. She kept counting, $47 and some change. Not enough. Her name was Lottie Crane. Short for Charlotte, though no one called her that except government offices and the collection agencies that had started leaving messages on the landline. She was 26 years old. She had a certificate in bookkeeping from a community college in Sudbury, and she had spent the last 3 years cleaning up a financial mess that was not hers, in a house that barely felt like home, for a man who had never once said thank you. The man in the other room was named Varro. She didn't know his first name then. She wouldn't know it for a long time. To everyone in that world, he was simply Varro. One name, the way old cathedrals have one name, the way certain natural disasters are referred to by a single word for the rest of recorded history. She would find out later that his full name was Aleksei Varro, that he had been born in a city that had changed its name twice since then, and that he had arrived in Canada at 19 with nothing except a facility for numbers and a total absence of fear. But that night, she only knew the silence. Her father came into the kitchen 10 minutes later. He looked like a man who had just signed something he couldn't unsign. "Lottie," he said, "there's someone who wants to meet you." She looked up from the coins. "I'm busy, Lottie." The way he said her name the second time, she understood it wasn't a request. She had expected someone loud. In her experience, men who inspired that particular kind of fear were always loud about it, always performing, always needing the room to know they were dangerous. What she walked into instead was a man sitting at her father's kitchen table like he owned it. Not because he was sprawling or taking up space, but because he was entirely still. He had a cup of tea in front of him. Her father's tea, she realized, the good stuff she bought at the No Frills on Lakeshore. And he was looking at her with the flat, assessing calm of someone who already knew the answer to a question and was simply waiting to see if the variable would confirm it. He was older than she'd expected. Mid-40s, maybe, with a jaw that looked like it had been set wrong after something broke it. There was a scar running from below his left ear down toward his collar, and his hands, folded on the table, were the hands of someone who had used them for things other than paperwork. And yet there was something precise about him. The suit, the way the cuffs sat, the exact angle of his posture. A man who had learned to be careful about surfaces. "Mrs. Crane," he said, not a question. "Mr." She stopped. She didn't have a last name. "I don't know who you are," he said, and nothing else. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. She didn't know why she did it. Somewhere behind her, her father made a small sound of surprise. Apparently she was supposed to stand. She ignored him. "What do you want?" she said. Varro looked at her for a moment. "Your father owes me a considerable amount of money," he said. His accent was slight, careful, like something he'd worked to sand down. "He has been unable to pay it back on the agreed schedule. I've extended that schedule twice." "He told me it was a business loan," Lottie said. "From a private lender. That's accurate. He didn't tell me who the private lender was." "Also accurate," Varro said. "Are you aware of how much?" She was. She had found the papers 8 months ago in a shoebox under his bed while looking for the title to the car. $83,000 Canadian, with an interest structure that she had recognized immediately as something no legitimate bank would touch. She had done the math twice because the math had seemed wrong. It wasn't wrong. She had felt sick for 2 days, and then she had felt simply tired, which was a feeling she was more accustomed to. 83,000, she said, plus interest. Current total would be, she did the calculation in her head without trying, somewhere around 104, depending on the exact date of the last payment. Varro looked at her with something that wasn't quite surprise, more like recalibration. 106, he said. "As of this morning, your compound rate is aggressive." Yes, he agreed without apology. It is. Silence. Her father, behind her, had gone entirely still. She could hear the furnace ticking. My father can't pay that, she said. No, Varro said. He cannot. So what happens now? He looked at her steadily. That depends, he said, on you. The offer, if she could call it that, if a thing could be called an offer when the alternative was left deliberately vague, was this: Varro needed a bookkeeper. Not a front-facing accountant, not someone to file taxes, but someone who could sit inside the numbers of an operation that moved money through 7 different structures, across 3 provinces, and make it look, from every relevant angle, like nothing more interesting than commercial real estate and a few holding companies. His current person had retired. The previous one before that had made a mistake. He did not elaborate on what had happened to either of them. In exchange, her father's debt cleared, all of it, the $106,000, gone as of the date she agreed. And me, she said. You'll be paid, he said. Fairly, the hours are irregular, the work is complex. I understand you have a certificate in bookkeeping, community college. I know where it's from. She looked at him. He had clearly already looked into her, which she should have found frightening, and instead found obscurely clarifying. At least he knew what he was getting. How long? She said. As long as it takes to find a permanent replacement, he said. Or until I decide you are the permanent replacement, and if I say no, Varro picked up the teacup. Drank, set it down. Then I'll pursue other avenues with your father, he said. I don't have any particular interest in your family, Miss Crane, but I will recover what I'm owed. She already knew she was going to say yes. She had known from the moment she sat down, not because she was afraid, though she was in a practical, clear-eyed way that had nothing to do with panic, but because she had been calculating debts her whole life, and this was a debt she could actually see the bottom of. I want one condition, she said. Something shifted in Varro's face, almost imperceptible. Go on. Once the debt is cleared, my father is out, she said. No further loans, no further contact. Whatever he comes to you with, the answer is no. You're asking me to refuse a potential client. I'm asking you to refuse a liability, she said. He'll be back in debt to someone within 6 months. I'd prefer it wasn't you. Varro regarded her for a long moment. Then, for the first time, something crossed his face that might have been the distant ancestor of amusement. All right, he said. One condition. Agreed. She held out her hand. He looked at it briefly, again, that recalibration, and then he shook it. His grip was dry and deliberate, and he let go immediately. Monday, he said, standing. 8 o'clock. I'll send you an address. He left without saying goodbye to her father. She sat at the table and listened to the door close, and then to her father coming into the kitchen saying, Lottie, what did you do, Lottie? And she went back to counting the $47 on the table because the hydro bill wasn't going to pay itself, and she still needed rice. The address he sent was in the east end of the city. Not downtown, not somewhere glassy and corporate, but a building on a street that looked, from the outside, like a logistics company that had seen better decades. The interior was different, clean, precise, the kind of quiet that comes from good insulation and deliberate choices. She was met at the door by a man named Croft, who had the demeanor of someone who had been a soldier and found civilian life slightly beneath him, and he led her through 2 security doors and into a back office that contained 3 monitors, a locked filing cabinet, and Varro, sitting at a desk, already working. He did not look up when she came in. The files are on the left drive, he said. Current quarter. I want you to look at the Pemberton structure first and tell me what you see. She sat down. She looked at the Pemberton structure. After 12 minutes, she told him what she saw. He looked up then. How long did that take you? To find it or to understand it? Either 8 minutes to find, 4 to understand why it was there. He looked at her for a moment. The last person took 3 days, he said, and didn't fully understand it. The last person was working backwards, she said. If you start from the income and trace it forward, the pattern is obvious. Someone built this structure to be found, but only by someone who wasn't looking in the right direction. It's clever. It's not clever enough. You sound like you're critiquing it. I am critiquing it, she said. It has a flaw. Here, she pointed at the screen. If someone subpoenas the Pemberton records and cross-references against this holding, the timing gap is 12 days too short. You need 14, minimum, probably 18 to be comfortable. Varro was quiet for a moment. Then, fix it, that'll take a few hours. I have a few hours. She fixed it. It took her 2.5. When she was done, she sat back and looked at the ceiling, and there was a particular pleasure in that. Not the kind of pleasure she'd thought she was allowed to have at work, which was just the relief of things being correct, but something more like satisfaction, the pleasure of a problem that had actually been worth solving. When she turned around, Varro was watching her. "You like it," he said. Not a question. "I like when things balance," she said. "I always have." He looked at her with that steady, unreadable attention. "Why bookkeeping?" "Because numbers don't lie," she said. "People lie about numbers all the time. But the numbers themselves, if you look long enough, they always tell you exactly what happened." He said nothing for a moment. Then he looked back at his own screen. 8 o'clock tomorrow, he said. She came back at 8 o'clock the next day, and the day after, and for the next 11 weeks. She learned, slowly, the shape of him, not who he was. She understood that was not available to her and made no attempt to access it. But the shape, the way he worked, the way he thought, the things that made him set down whatever he was doing and look at the ceiling in the particular way, that meant he was calculating something that wouldn't resolve quickly. He drank black coffee until about 2 in the afternoon, and then switched to tea without comment. He had no patience for people who came to him with incomplete information. He had a very specific intolerance for imprecision, not mistakes, which he treated as data, but imprecision, which he treated as disrespect. He was rarely in the room with her. He had other things, other offices, other floors of whatever this building really was. But when he was there, she was aware of him the way you're aware of a change in air pressure, not loudly, not obviously, but consistently. She did not let herself think about this too carefully. She did her work. She found 3 more structural flaws in the existing setup and corrected them before he asked. She learned the filing system, created a new one, and submitted it as a proposal with a 3-page explanation of why the change would reduce their exposure by approximately 40%. He read the proposal without comment and implemented it the following week. One evening, mid-November, she was still at her desk at 9 o'clock because she had found an anomaly in the Q3 transfers that was bothering her, and she wanted to understand it before she left. She was so deep in the spreadsheet that she didn't hear him come in. "You should eat something," he said from behind her. She startled badly enough that she knocked her coffee cup, and he caught it. She didn't even see him move, but he caught it and set it back on the desk and stepped back. "Sorry," she said automatically. "Don't apologize," he said. "I came in quietly." He set a paper bag on the corner of her desk. "There's a place on Broadview. Their food is worth eating." She looked at the bag, then at him. "You don't have to work this late," he said. "Whatever you've found will still be there in the morning." "It's bothering me," she said. He looked at the screen over her shoulder. He was standing close enough that she could hear him breathe. "Show me," she showed him. He looked at it for 2 minutes in silence, and she could feel him thinking in that particular still way, the way she'd come to recognize as the sign that something had engaged him properly. "That's a redundant payment," he said finally. "Someone duplicated a transfer and didn't notice. It was offset against a different account. Is it yours?" "No," he said. "It's been sitting there for 8 months. Someone made a mistake, and no one caught it until now," he said. He looked at her. "Eat something. I'll take care of it." She ate something. He sat at his desk across the room and made a phone call in a language she didn't speak. She didn't ask what he said. She finished the food, which was genuinely good. Dumplings, she thought, and something with lentils, and then she put her coat on, and she said good night. "Mrs. Crane," he said as she was at the door. She turned. "Good catch," he said, not warmly, but directly and without qualification. She went home and stood in her apartment, small, on the 3rd floor of a building in Riverdale with one window that looked out at a parking lot, and she stood there for a while without turning on the lights. She was in trouble. She could see it the way she could see the flaws in a financial structure. Not because she was looking for it, but because the numbers didn't lie, and the numbers here were simple. She had started caring what he thought of her, and that was not a number she had budgeted for. It came apart in January. Not her work. Her work was fine. Her work was better than fine. She had by that point restructured 3 of the 7 account streams and identified a problem in the Halcott subsidiary that, had it gone unnoticed another quarter, would have created a liability large enough to pull attention from agencies she suspected Varro preferred to avoid. She knew she was good at this. She had always known she was good with numbers. She just hadn't known until now that there were numbers worth being good at. What came apart in January was the rest of it. Her father called on a Thursday. He had borrowed money again. Not from Varro, she had made sure of that, but from someone else, someone with even less patience for a payment schedule than Varro had shown. He needed help. He said the word please, in a way that made her understand it had cost him something, and she felt the familiar pull of it, the gravitational force of being needed by someone who had never once chosen to need her for anything good. She went to work the next morning with a headache and a number in her head, 4,260, which was what she had in savings, and which was also what her father needed, and which was also most of what she had. She sat at her desk and she did not touch her savings, and she opened the Q4 files and she worked. At some point in the afternoon, Varro came in, looked at her once and said, "What happened?" "Nothing," she said. He sat down. He did not open his computer. He just sat there, and she could feel his attention on the side of her face the way you can feel a lamp being aimed at you, and after about 4 minutes she said, "My father," again, without looking up. Silence. "How much?" he said. Not a question. "I'll handle it," she said. "How much, Lottie?" It was the first time he had used her first name. She registered it somewhere below the level of the headache, in whatever part of her was still paying attention to things other than the spreadsheet. 4,000, she said. "I have it. You shouldn't have to. I know I shouldn't have to," she said. Her voice came out harder than she intended. "I know. I have been knowing that for about 12 years. It doesn't change what's in front of me." She set down her pen. "He's not your problem. He's not supposed to be your problem, we agreed on that, and he's not supposed to be mine either, but here we are." Another silence. "Then I'll take care of it." She looked up. "Don't," she said. "I mean it. If you do something to him—" "I'm not going to do something to him," Varro said, with the faintest edge of impatience, as if the implication offended him on some technical level. "I'll have someone speak to his creditor, make the arrangement go away." "No payment? Then he'll just do it again?" "Yes," Varro said. "He likely will." He was looking at her with that careful directness. "But not this week. This week you won't have to spend your savings on it." She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back. "Why?" she said. "Because you're useful to me," he said, "and you can't think clearly when you're worrying about him." It wasn't kind. It wasn't meant to be kind. It was an accounting of value, precisely the language she had come to expect from him, and yet she felt something loosen in her chest that had been pulled tight for so long she'd stopped noticing it. "Thank you," she said quietly. He looked away, back at his screen. "Finish the Q4 files," he said. "I need them by Friday." The thing she understood about Varro, slowly and then all at once the way you understand a balance sheet when the last figure finally clicks into place, was that he was not a cruel man. He was a precise man, and precision can look like coldness when you're standing on the outside of it. But cruelty required a kind of pleasure in damage that she did not see in him. What she saw instead was someone who had built an entire life out of control because, she suspected, there had been a time when he had none. The suits, the stillness, the exact way he said things. All of it was structure. All of it was a filing system for a self that did not trust disorder. She recognized it. She had built the same thing, just with smaller materials. She did not tell him this. There were things she kept entirely to herself, and this was one of them. What she could not keep to herself, what eventually refused to stay filed away, was the March evening when she was leaving late, and he was coming in from somewhere cold, his coat still carrying the outside air, and she held the door and he looked at her, and for a moment they were very close in the narrow hallway and neither of them moved. Lottie, he said, just her name. The way he'd said it in January, but different, less a fact, more a question. Varro, she said back, which was also a question. He was looking at her with something that she had not seen on his face before, something that wasn't controlled, and the part of her that ran the numbers knew exactly what it was because she felt it too, and had been very carefully not feeling it for 4 months. "This is not," he started. "I know," she said. "I'm not a." "I know," she said again. He looked at her for a moment more. Then he said, "Very afraid of me." "No," she said. "Should I be?" He thought about it, actually thought about it, which was more honest than most answers. "I don't know," he said. "I'm more afraid of the alternative," she said. "What alternative?" She looked at him. "Spending another 12 years being careful enough not to need anyone," she said, "counting change at a kitchen table and pretending that's enough." He was quiet for a long moment. The hallway was very still. She could hear from somewhere in the building the sound of the furnace, and it reminded her of her father's kitchen and the night this started, which felt very far away now. "I don't know how to do this well," Varro said finally. It cost him something to say it. She could tell by the way the sentence came out. Too flat, too controlled, which was what his voice did when he was working to keep it that way. "Neither do I," she said, "but I'm reasonably good at learning new systems." Something crossed his face then, complicated, almost painful, and then something that was unmistakably warmth, quiet and real, and clearly unfamiliar on him, like a language he hadn't spoken in a long time. He reached out and tucked a piece of her hair back, just one piece, just that, and then he stepped back and looked at her with those steady dark eyes. "Friday," he said, "if you're not busy." She thought about her savings account, and her father, and the apartment with the parking lot view, and the 11 weeks of spreadsheets, and the $47 she had been counting the night she first heard his name. "I'm not busy Friday," she said. He nodded, once. He walked past her into the building. She stood in the hallway for a moment, alone, and she did the math the way she always did, calculated the risk, the exposure, the variables she couldn't control, and for once she let the answer be something other than too much. The numbers didn't lie, and what the numbers said, for the first time in a very long time, was, this might actually balance. She put her coat on, and she walked out into the cold Toronto night, and she was already thinking about Friday, and it felt, improbably and precisely, like the beginning of something she hadn't accounted for.